The January cold bit through every layer of clothing, turning breath into visible clouds and fingers into numb sticks. Grace Bennett sat on the concrete bench outside Memorial Hospital. Her 3-year-old daughter Maya pressed against her side, both of them trying to share what little warmth they had. Grace wore a gray jacket that had seen better years. Her blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Maya, bundled in a red coat over a pink dress, her hair in 2 pigtails, clutched her mother's hand and asked the same question she'd been asking for the past 20 minutes. "Mommy, when can we go inside?" "I'm cold." "Soon, sweetheart," Grace said, though she had no idea if that was true. "We just need to wait a little longer." They'd been at the hospital since early morning. Maya had been running a fever for 3 days, and this morning she'd complained that her ear hurt so badly she couldn't stop crying. Grace, who'd been working double shifts as a waitress to make ends meet since her husband left them 18 months ago, had no health insurance. She'd brought Maya to the emergency room, sat through 4 hours of waiting, seen a doctor for 10 minutes, received a prescription for antibiotics. That would cost $70. She didn't have, and been told to come back if the fever didn't break in 48 hours. The prescription sat in Grace's pocket like a weight. $70 might as well have been $700. She'd done the math on the bus ride from the hospital pharmacy. Back to the hospital, if she didn't fill the prescription, she could buy groceries for the next week and make rent. If she filled it, they'd eat, but they'd be short on rent again. And their landlord had already warned her that one more late payment meant eviction. So she'd come back to the hospital, hoping to plead with someone, anyone, to help, to explain that her daughter needed medicine and she simply didn't have the money. But the financial aid office was closed until Monday. Today was Friday, and the social worker had given her a list of resources that all required applications and processing time. Maya's ear infection didn't have, which left Grace sitting on a bench outside the hospital in January, trying to figure out what to do while her daughter shivered against her and asked questions she couldn't answer. "Mommy, my ear really hurts," Maya whimpered. "I know, baby, I know. We're going to make it better, I promise." Grace pulled Maya closer, blinking back tears. She was 29 years old, and she'd somehow failed at the most basic task of parenthood, keeping her child healthy and safe. A shadow fell across them. Grace looked up to see a man standing before them, probably in his early 40s, wearing an expensive dark suit with a white dress shirt open at the collar, his dark hair neatly styled. Everything about him spoke of success and authority. The watch on his wrist probably cost more than Grace made in 6 months, and his Italian leather shoes had never seen a bus floor. "Excuse me," he said, his voice deep and surprisingly gentle. "I don't mean to intrude, but I couldn't help noticing you've been sitting out here for quite a while. Are you waiting for someone?" Grace stiffened, immediately defensive. She'd learned the hard way that people who looked like this man, wealthy, powerful, put together, rarely approached people like her with good intentions. They asked questions so they could feel better about themselves, or they made judgments about her parenting, or they called security to move along the people, who made the hospital entrance look less pristine. "We're fine," she said shortly. "Thank you." The man looked at Maya, who was pressing her hand against her ear and trying not to cry. Then he looked back at Grace, and there was something in his expression, concern, perhaps, or recognition of pain he understood. "May I sit down?" he asked, gesturing to the bench. Grace wanted to say no, wanted to tell him to go away, to leave them alone, to stop looking at them with that careful expression that suggested he saw exactly how desperate they were. But she was too tired to be rude, and Maya was leaning heavily against her, small body radiating heat from the fever. "It's a public bench," Grace said. The man sat down, maintaining a respectful distance. Up close, Grace could see the concern in his dark eyes, the way he looked at Maya with what seemed like genuine worry. "I'm Michael Hartford," he said. "I work here at the hospital." Of course he did. Probably some administrator or specialist, someone who made 6 figures, while people like Grace sat outside, trying to figure out how to afford basic medical care. "Good for you," Grace said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Michael didn't react to her tone. Instead, he looked at Maya again. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Maya looked up at her mother for permission. Grace nodded slightly, and Maya said shyly, "Maya, I'm 3 years old. My ear hurts really bad. I'm sorry to hear that, Michael said seriously, as if Maya were an adult deserving of his full respect. Ear infections are very painful. Have you seen a doctor? Yes, Maya said. But Mommy's sad because the medicine costs too much money. Grace felt her face burn with shame. The honest, unfiltered observation of a 3-year-old, laying bare their situation for this wealthy stranger to judge. Maya, hush, Grace said softly. But Michael was looking at Grace now, understanding dawning in his expression. You can't afford the prescription. It wasn't a question. Grace felt tears threatening and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in front of this man. She would not fall apart on a bench outside a hospital while her daughter watched. We'll manage, she said, her voice tight. How? Michael asked gently. I'm not judging you. I'm genuinely asking. If you can't afford the medication, how will you manage? Grace felt something break inside her. The careful walls she'd built to protect herself from pity and judgment, from the weight of all the ways she was failing as a mother. I don't know, she whispered. I've been sitting here for 30 minutes, trying to figure out how to pay for medicine my daughter needs. I don't have health insurance because I work 2 waitressing jobs that both keep me just under full-time hours so they don't have to provide benefits. I make too much to qualify for immediate government assistance, but not enough to actually live on. And I'm out of options and ideas, so yes, I'm sitting on a bench outside a hospital trying to figure out how to keep my daughter from getting sicker, while also keeping a roof over our heads. The words spilled out in a rush, months of pressure and fear and exhaustion finding their release. Grace immediately regretted it, expecting Michael to make his excuses and leave, to decide this was too much mess and complication for a Friday afternoon. Instead, he did something completely unexpected. He pulled out his phone, made a call and said, Jennifer, it's Michael Hartford. I need you to call down to the hospital pharmacy and tell them to fill a prescription for Maya Bennett. Yes, immediately. Put it on my personal account. No, not the hospital foundation. My personal account. Thank you. He hung up and looked at Grace, who was staring at him in shock. What's the medication? Grace fumbled the prescription from her pocket with shaking hands. Michael glanced at it, made another call, and within 5 minutes had arranged for the medication to be filled and delivered to them at the bench, all paid for. I don't understand, Grace said, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. Why would you do that? You don't know us. Michael was quiet for a moment, watching Maya, who had perked up slightly, sensing that something good was happening even if she didn't fully understand what. Can I tell you a story? He asked. Grace nodded, unable to speak. 25 years ago, my mother sat on a bench very similar to this one, outside a different hospital, with me and my younger sister. We were 7 and 5. My father had left us 6 months earlier. My sister had pneumonia, and my mother couldn't afford the medication. She'd been crying, trying to figure out what to do, when a doctor who was leaving his shift stopped and asked if she was okay. Michael's voice grew distant with memory. That doctor sat down, listened to her story, and paid for the medication. Then he helped my mother apply for programs that eventually got us health care coverage. He checked on us for months afterward, made sure we were okay. He changed our entire trajectory. What happened to him? Grace asked softly. He became my mentor. He's the